Checking in live from Vista Grande, the site of Book Chat. Coming up here in about 22 more minutes. But one thing that I wanted to do is I wanted to comment on this big, beautiful view that we've got here. So we call this place Vista Grande because, look right there, it's a vista and it's very big. This is one of our favorite spots here on the ranch. This is actually where I got engaged to my beautiful wife, Sarah. This is another spot that the volunteers did a lot of work to help us clear out. And so here in about 20 more minutes, I'm gonna come back at you live with April and Christina, and we're gonna lead you through a little book chat, talk about some of our favorite books, and then Christina is going to read one of the most moving passages, at least for me, Thinking Like a Mountain. And we're going to walk you through a journal activity the same way we would do it with our visiting kids. So sorry that we can't see all the way to Stonewall today because of the haze, but it's still beautiful out here. So we'll see you guys in 20 more minutes. Now, I got the dead cat.
Hey, Jared.
There you go. We're live.
Hey, everybody. We are very excited to be joining you from a beautiful place on the ranch, as Jared already talked about, called Vista Grande. I think you said you proposed to your wife here. Is that what you said?
Yes, and she was crazy enough to say yes.
Well, that means that this is a special place for many reasons then. It's a beautiful day, and we are very excited about our SELA Spectacular Virtual Picnic-a-thon, and we thank everybody who has tuned in over the day. We thank everybody who's expressed their generous support to us during the day, and we're really excited to have you here, and we hope you continue to join us because we've got a number of really wonderful things still coming up.
We sure do.
Even though we've had a wonderful morning, early afternoon, we still have a lot on the schedule. And that's a perfect time for me to say that, we mentioned earlier today that we're really like a family out here on the ranch, and that is figuratively and literally as well. So one of the famous people of today's events has been someone we lovingly refer to as Big Steve, and he... Big Steve and his lovely wife, Amanda, have a couple of amazing children. And we really want to give these children an experience that they're really looking forward to. And we want to make sure not to disappoint children, right? Who likes to disappoint children?
No one. Absolutely no one.
Exactly. And so if we reach...
$30,000.
Thank you. If we reach $30,000, which we are very optimistic and hopeful that we can do, those beautiful children of Big Steve are going to be able to cover him with silly string and give him facefuls of whipped cream. So, please, don't deprive Steve's kids of doing that to their father. Help us get to 30,000. It'll be a great incentive, and we're really looking forward to it. Quite honestly, we're looking forward to it as much as Steve's children are.
That's a very, very true statement. I mean, silly string, whipped cream in the face, ice bucket bath. Who does not want to see that?
And now let me ask you this. Are we sure we have enough silly string?
He is pretty big. We might not. We might need a runner, and this is a perfect opportunity to thank our wonderful runners to go get us some more. But we'll see. And you know what? I think if we do hit $30,000, I think he wouldn't mind getting silly string twice today. And if we run out of silly string, another day. Sorry, Big Steve.
Sorry, not sorry.
Sorry, not sorry.
Great. Switching seats.
Switching seats. Like I said, we're live. We're going to try to adjust as we can.
That's another thing I'd like to say, that I think we've had a few minor technical glitches and other glitches today. I feel like we've done a really, really good job of addressing those and figuring them out on the fly.
We do what we can, and I appreciate all of your patience out there with us too. So I think this is a fantastic time to start a little bit of book chat.
All right, let's do this. So Jared and I thought it would be a wonderful opportunity to share some of the books that have meant the most to us in terms of our careers as scientists, and also just sort of in terms of our personal love of the environment and nature and conservation. And so that's what we're going to do today is share some of our favorite and most meaningful books that have been important to us. And so I'm going to start. I would like to first mention the book Arctic Dreams by Barry Lopez. And it's a book that resonates so much with me because of first of all, it's beautifully written. The prose in that book makes you feel like you are in the Arctic, exploring, understanding what an important part of the global ecosystem the Arctic is, and really allowing the reader opportunities to reflect on what that kind of environment means, both to us as a global community, but also to one's own sense of self-reflection and one's own understanding of one's place in the environment. And because of that, again, it really resonates. And it's something that I think that everyone should have the opportunity to read to gain those experiences that I was just describing. So that's my first one, Arctic Dreams by Barry Lopez. Jared, how about you?
Thank you for asking. So the first book that I really want to talk about today is, for those of you who have known me for a while, I grew up as a herpetologist. My dad being super influential and being a herpetologist, biologist himself, we didn't really have a choice. And so our bedtime stories today is still one of my favorite books. And Snakes and Snake Hunting by Carl Caulfield, one of the absolute original seminal works in terms of the big snake push movement of the 70s and into the 80s. And this was a book that was published in the mid-60s. And so we would get these stories read to us every night. And then what was really great is, as a biologist and a teacher, we actually got to go out into the field. And my dad took me and my brothers and my sister all over the country. And so we actually got to go to the spots where Caulfield was writing about finding milk snakes and rattlesnakes and diamondbacks. It was so cool. So that book still rings true to me, and I love it. And I have 3 first editions, and I can't wait to get more. I am a book collector, too. I have quite a few. So that's my first one. April, what's your second book?
Well, thanks, Jared. And I'd like to take a second to say that when Jared and I were talking about doing this live segment, we were kind of talking about books, and we guessed that we might have some overlap, but we also might not have some overlap because of our different interests when it comes to ecology and conservation. And that turned out to be true. And that sounds like an amazing book. And I really appreciated your reflection on what it meant to you as a child, especially. But that's neat because it's not one that was on my list.
It's not one that's on many people's lists. So I hope everybody goes out and checks it out. It's really cool.
Wonderful. So the second book that I would like to talk about is The Control of Nature by John McPhee. And many of you know that John McPhee was a very prolific nature writer, wrote a lot of books. The Control of Nature is particularly powerful, I think, because of the fact that John McPhee really describes how we as human beings are often constantly fighting and trying to be in combat with nature. Instead of working together with the natural world, or exploring the natural world and trying to do the things that we like to do as human beings and build our communities and everything that we feel is important to us as human beings, trying to do that fighting and combating nature instead of working with nature. And so in that book, The Control of Nature, there are several different sections of the book that describe the, in some cases, catastrophic failure of human-engineered projects that try to, in fact, control nature and ultimately fail. So it's a great book that really helps you think about what happens when we try to fight nature instead of working with it. And I think that SELA is an especially good place to reflect on that kind of thinking, because of the fact that one of our visions here at SELA is to work with nature and think about our place in it as caretakers of it. Great. So, Jared, what's your second book on your list?
Thank you, April. So actually, I love that was a really good lead-in, because when we talk about appreciating nature and working with it, my second book is a book called Thrills of a Naturalist Quest. And it's all about Raymond Ditmars in the early 1900s traveling the world and filming reptiles and amphibians and writing about it and actually collecting it. So that book was really important on me because it got me knowing that I could have a career going out and playing. So I could be a professional dirtbag biologist. And here I am today. And plus he's another herpetologist, and that was his big love. But when you think about the times that he was going out in the early 1900s, he grew up in the Bronx, right by Central Park. And he talks about finding timber rattlesnakes right there. And growing up in Pennsylvania, my dad would take us out to the talus slopes of the Carbon Mountains, and we got to go find timber rattlesnakes. So at a young age, I had this huge connection to Raymond Ditmars and his adventure. But I am sad to say that you can no longer go to Central Park and find timber rattlesnakes. But that's okay, because SELA is kind of like the Central Park for Austin and San Antonio, or Austintonio. So all of the snakes that we find out here are protected. And that's one of the things I love about that. So that is my second book.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jared. You know, I've heard you use the term dirtbag biologist a couple of times.
I do own the copyright.
Do you ever use the expression dirtbag herpetologist?
No, because herpetologists are already considered to be the lowest form of biologist, because we're always in the dirt or in the sand or in the mucky jungle, you know. So we already have that kind of stigma.
Sure.
So we like to just call ourselves dirtbag biologists.
Sure. Would an entomologist argue with that you're the...
You know, and I actually love that you brought that up, because a Michael Tennyson book called The Next Species, which actually I hadn't planned on talking about, talks about a group of scientists going into the Okavango crater and actually working together. You had ornithologists working with herpetologists, working with mammalogists, working with entomologists, because you had to take a helicopter ride, a 3.5 helicopter ride, to get dumped into the crater. And then all the supplies and stuff had to be there. Yeah. So you really had to work. So it makes you a really well-rounded biologist. I think part of my academic career was I took advantage of all the field trips from all the ology classes, even when I wasn't in that class, because that meant free trips to this place or that place where, okay, yeah, I have to spend some time trapping mammals, but then I can go out and look for the herps. So, yeah.
Excellent. Yes, I'm familiar with those ologist type of field trips. Great. Thank you, Jared. For the next book, I would like to bring it home right here to Texas. The next book on my list is the book Goodbye to a River, written by John Graves. And that is a book that was his reflection of the Brazos River, which was a very special river to him, and how his thoughts about how it would change once it was obstructed by a series of dams. And so it's a reflection, it's a description and reflection of a canoe trip he took down that river. And it particularly resonates with me because it's a Texas author, and unlike our friend here that grew up in Pennsylvania, I did grow up in Texas. And I grew up on different sections of the Brazos River. When I was little, we lived on the coast, and I spent many, many, many years of summer camp on the upper Brazos, Possum Kingdom Lake, which is, of course, a dammed part of the upper Brazos. So that's why that book is also particularly important for me. And again, it's beautifully written, and it's a wonderful reflection for anybody who loves rivers. How about you?
Why, thank you. So when we were going over our list of books to make sure that we didn't have any overlap, I really noticed that most of my books were tended to focus on reptiles and amphibians. I wonder why. But I don't want to leave out books like E.O. Wilson's Naturalist, kind of his account. And I don't want to leave out books like Walden and from Thoreau. I did my high school senior thesis in English class on Walden. And that was the first time I ever had that experience. And it was fantastic. And Emerson. And we have Edward Abbey. There's so many good books out there. As a book collector, I don't think you can read enough. And one of my friends, Judge Dan Mills, told me about 7 years ago when I first started out here, we were talking about, what the job was going to be. And he was like, oh, so you're educating. And I said, yeah. And then he goes, well, who do you serve? And I go, like J.J. Pickle and Bonham from San Antonio. And he goes, that's just fantastic, because I hope that you let all those kids know that there's two things that people will never be able to take from you. And that's your education, and that's your experience.
That's cool.
And so when we talk about you growing up in the Brazos and bringing that book home, books allow you to go to all these places and be inspired, because you can have careers like this, which is fantastic. So hope all of you comment out there what your favorite naturalist books are. And the last book I really want to talk about is another one that was so meaningful to me as a kid, and that is Their Blood Runs Cold by Dr. Whitfield Gibbons. He really puts in light what it's like to be a professional academic biologist, herpetologist, and he runs the Savannah River Ecology Lab in Georgia. And so he's still active, and he's still up there, and he's still doing all of his work. And it's really neat to now go and see him at the conferences, at the joint meeting conferences, and now I'm a peer, So here I grew up as this little fanboy.
Isn't that wonderful when you realize that your heroes are now your peers? It's pretty amazing.
It is pretty fantastic. And it's something that, I didn't really consider when I was a kid. And it wasn't until, medical school where I was like, this isn't for me. And you have to go back to your roots, and you have to find the Waldens, and you have to find Their Blood Runs Cold, and Many Happy Walks I Have Squandered, and all of this stuff that dates back to when nature was wild. And Their Blood Runs Cold really does that. And Dr. Gibbons, if you're listening, we're all ready for a sequel. Okay? I think it's about time. All right. So thank you.
Excellent. Speaking of time, how we doing? Good?
We are good on time.
All right. Okay. Well, then I am going to mention another regional book. There is a gentleman by the name of Ben Logan who only just recently passed away a few years ago. And he wrote a beautiful reflection on the plight of American farm families, and it's called The Land Remembers. And it's set on his family farm in the driftless area of Wisconsin, which is a beautiful area that was never flattened out by glacial drift, which is why they call it the driftless area. And it's a reflection on how important American farming families are to the landscape and to culture, and of course providing us all with food. So it's rather well known regionally, probably not so much outside of the sort of Wisconsin area, but it's a beautiful book if you ever get a chance to read it. Yeah.
Well, I love that, because now I have a new book to go read, which is fantastic. And I think we would be remiss if we didn't remind everybody that the Bamberger Ranch Preserve would not be here if it weren't for a book. When Mr. Bamberger was a kid, he read a book called Pleasant Valley, which was all about Louis Bromfield buying Malabar Farms, a degraded piece of farmland in Ohio, really close to where he grew up. And the book was all about, and to my knowledge, it's the very first time that the words habitat and restoration were ever put together. So it really ties it home, and it's something that when we start every tour at the hysterical marker, it's something that we like to tell the kids that you can find inspiration in anything. And Mr. Bamberger found it in that book. And I don't know how many copies he has on his shelf now, but whenever we need to borrow a copy to lend to one of our interns, he's got plenty. So I would also be remiss if we didn't talk about some of the books that have actually been written on the ranch.
Well, what a great idea. Why don't you talk about those?
So we have a book out there called Water from Stone by Jeffrey Green, which happens to be one of the first books written by us. And then we have this award-winning coffee table book written by your father with photographs by our cameraman right now, Rusty Yates.
Wow.
And one of our dear friends, David Langford. So, again, everybody that donates at the $500 or more level gets a free autographed copy sent to you. Okay? Remember that,
wonderful.
People.
And it is a beautiful book. Of course, we're a little biased, but it's a very beautiful book. And it's really, I feel really grateful that Rusty is not only an extraordinarily talented photographer, but he's also getting very, very good at using an iPhone and a gimbal.
That's true. So before we have any more technical glitches, one of the things that we do here on the ranch is you'll notice we kind of skirted around Aldo Leopold, the father of modern conservation here in North America. And the reason we did that is because every school group that comes out here for overnight programs, we do a little journal exercise. And every night at summer camp, we'd have a different passage by Leopold, or we would have a Wendell Berry passage, or Jane Goodall or Rachel Carson, to really kind of help introduce the kids to naturalists and to literature. Because, people need to realize that science is everywhere, reading is everywhere, math is everywhere. We all work together with that. And so Christina is going to read a passage called Thinking Like a Mountain. And what a fantastic spot to be right now, as Saharan dust aside, we can really see what it's like to be a mountain. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to have a reflection question, just like we would have afterwards. So give us about 5 seconds so I can switch the microphones, and we'll come back to you live. And you're good to go.
Okay. And just let me know if you can hear me.
I will.
All right. Hi, everyone. So as Jared said, this is Thinking Like a Mountain by Aldo Leopold from a Sand County Almanac. A deep, chesty ball echoes from rimrock to rimrock, rolls down the mountain, and fades into the far blackness of the night. It is an outburst of wild, defiant sorrow and of contempt for all the adversities of the world. Every living thing, and perhaps many a dead one as well, pays heed to that call. To the deer it is a reminder of the way of all flesh. To the pine, a forecast of midnight scuffles and of blood upon the snow. To the coyote, and a promise of gleanings to come. To the cowman, a threat of red ink at the bank. To the hunter, a challenge of fang against bullet. Yet behind these obvious and immediate hopes and fears, there lies a deeper meaning, known only to the mountain itself. Only the mountain has lived long enough to listen objectively to the howl of a wolf. Those unable to decipher the hidden meaning know nevertheless that it is there, for it is felt in all wolf country and distinguishes that country from all other land. It tingles in the spine of all who hear wolves by night or who scan their tracks by day. Even without sight or sound of wolf, it is implicit in 100 small events: the midnight whinny of a pack horse, the rattle of rolling rocks, the bound of a fleeing deer, the way shadows lie under the spurs. Only the ineducable tyro can fail to sense the presence or absence of wolves, or the fact that mountains have a secret opinion about them. My own conviction on this score dates from the day I saw a wolf die. We were eating lunch on a high rimrock, at the foot of which a turbulent river elbowed its way. We saw what we thought was a doe fording the torrent, her breast awash in white water. When she climbed the bank toward us and shook out her tail, we realized our error. It was a wolf. A half-dozen others, evidently grown pups, sprang from the willows and all joined in a welcoming melee of wagging tails and playful maulings. What was literally a pile of wolves writhed and tumbled in the center of an open flat at the foot of our rimrock. In those days we had never heard of passing up a chance to kill a wolf. In a second we were pumping lead into the pack, but with more excitement than with accuracy. How to aim a steep downhill shot is always confusing. When our rifles were empty, the old wolf was down, and a pup was dragging a leg into the impassable slide rocks. We reached the old wolf in time to watch a fierce green fire dying in her eyes. I realized then, and have known ever since, that there was something new to me in those eyes, something known only to her and to the mountain. I was young then, and full of trigger itch. I thought that because fewer wolves meant more deer, that no wolves would mean hunter's paradise. But after seeing the green fire die, I sensed that neither the wolf nor the mountain agreed with such a view. Since then I have lived to see state after state extirpate its wolves. I have watched the face of many a newly wolfless mountain, and seen the south-facing slopes wrinkle with a maze of new deer trails. I have seen every edible bush and seedling browsed, first to an anemic desuetude, then to death. I have seen every edible tree defoliated to the height of a saddle horn. Such a mountain looks as if someone had given God a new pruning shears and forbidden him all other exercise. In the end, the starved bones of the hoped-for deer herd, dead of its own too much, bleach with the bones of dead sage, or molder under the high-lined junipers. I now suspect that just as a deer herd lives in mortal fear of its wolves, so does a mountain live in mortal fear of its deer. And perhaps with better cause, for while a buck pulled down by wolves can be replaced in 2 or 3 years, a range pulled down by too many deer may fail of replacement in as many decades. So also with cows, the cowman who cleans his range of wolves does not realize that he is taking over the wolf's job of trimming the herd to fit the range. He has not learned to think like a mountain. Hence we have dust bowls and rivers washing the future into the sea. We all strive for safety, prosperity, comfort, long life, and dullness. The deer strives with his supple legs, the cowman with trap and poison, the statesman with pen, the most of us with machines, votes, and dollars. But it all comes to the same thing: peace in our time. A measure of success in this is all well enough, and perhaps is a requisite to objective thinking. But too much safety seems to yield only danger in the long run. Perhaps this is behind Thoreau's dictum, "In wildness is the salvation of the world." Perhaps this is the hidden meaning in the howl of the wolf, long known among mountains, but seldom perceived among men. So as Jared mentioned, this is not a random reading that we've chosen. It's one that we have used a lot here on the ranch. We've used it for our camp and our campers that come out. And I'd like to share with you guys the most recent time we read this. This was pre-quarantine. We had a school group from San Antonio out here on the ranch called Bonham. A really rowdy, rambunctious group of sixth graders, I should mention. And we spent a whole week with them and got to know them. And one of the last activities we did after seeing, these crazy kids outside in the wild is that we sat down in Turkey Hollow and read this passage to them. And actually, when we read it the first time, I hadn't been on the ranch in a while, and I actually teared up a little bit, which I don't usually do, just to hear it. And then a second time whenever I started to hear their answers. Because it's one thing to hear Jared and to hear April, biologists who have really had time to make these reflections, and it's an entirely another thing to hear sixth graders and their takeaway from that passage. And to hear that they really understand it is so eye-opening, and it's always just so touching and lovely. So my answer for what it means to think like a mountain usually changes, depending on what has been focused on in my life and what has been influencing me at the time. But when I read it today, thinking like a mountain is the ability to think beyond yourself, to understand that everything is interconnected and see the impact that you can have on something, and to see the trickle-down effect that will have.
I'm going to take the mic from you. No.
Sure.
So you see how powerful books can be and how the written word can really influence a lot of different people. And like Christina said, that sixth grade group, that was a transformative experience, not only for her, but even for me, who does this a lot. Because we don't often get a group of sixth graders that get so involved and so connected that they lead us and inspire us as we move to the next generation of hope. Because this ranch is nothing if it's not a beacon of hope. Because one man can make a difference. Look at Mr. Bamberger, again, inspired by a book to do everything that you see today and more. We are just barely scratching the surface. So when the pandemic is over, I hope all of you come out and join us. And at 3:45, in 15 minutes, you are going to see the talents of our photographer, board chairman extraordinaire, Rusty Yates. Not only are you get to experience some of the photographs from Seasons at Sela, but there's a slideshow of all the photos that he took basically from quarantine in mid-March when we started up until just last week. And then he's going to do something really fun. He's going to take you through a bike ride in the middle of the ranch, which is fantastic. And then, as another treat, to stick with this Seasons at Sela theme, Dr. April Sansom gets to interview her dad, Dr. Andy Sansom, who just happens to be the author of Seasons at Sela. So we hope all of you tune back in at 3:45, and at 4:45, we'll be back with another live segment. So thank you, everybody. Comment what it means to think like a mountain to you. We're going to be back in about an hour and 15 minutes. 3:45, next segment. Thank you.